If Chelsea weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. You know, stop it. Oh, it's so weird. Stop. Well, you're known for saying outrageous things, Mr. Clinton. Who are you, Woody Allen? You want to know what a little bit more about you guys, so we play this game. Here it's called Fave 5. I'll ask the question. Chelsea, you answer first, and then Dad, you answer also. Okay, Chelsea, what's the favorite thing you have in common with your father, either philanthropy or public speaking? Bill, with your daughter. Well, I was going to say, but I can't relate that. When Zohran Mamdani calmly stood up during the hearing, no one expected him to bring the kind of receipts that would have Chelsea Clinton visibly cracking in real time. But what he revealed left a permanent mark, and the public still reeling. You could feel the tension the moment the hearing began. No chatter, no whispers, just the hollow silence that fills a room when everyone knows something's about to go wrong, but they don't know where it's going to come from. It was a Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C. The hearing was supposed to be a routine discussion on ethics in public office. Routine is what they always say before things spiral. C-SPAN had its cameras rolling, but few expected anything newsworthy. Chelsea Clinton had agreed to appear voluntarily, rare considering her usual avoidance of Capitol Hill. She arrived just before 9:00 a.m. wearing a muted navy suit, hair straight, lips pressed into something that wasn't quite a smile. She was there to defend the Clinton Foundation's relaunch under a new name and claimed focus on children and workforce development. Representative Zohran Mamdani hadn't said much that morning. He sat at the far left corner of the semicircle, flipping through a manila folder like it was just another stack of documents. His face gave nothing away, no glance, no signal, but every so often he tapped his pen against the edge of his desk, slow, deliberate, like a countdown. Nobody was paying attention to Chairman Halbridge, a stiff man from Oklahoma with a too-tight tie. He cleared his throat and gestured toward Chelsea. "You may begin." Chelsea leaned forward, adjusted the mic, and began her statement. Her voice was calm, practiced. "Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here today as a private citizen." The words rolled out smoothly like a pre-approved press release. She spoke about impact, legacy, responsible giving. A few lawmakers nodded absently. Most glanced at their phones. Only Zohran seemed fully present. 20 minutes in, as Chelsea flipped to page 2 of her printed remarks, Zohran lifted his hand. "Mr. Chairman," he said. The room paused. Chairman Halbridge frowned. "Representative Mamdani will allow statements to finish." "I won't take long," Zohran said, "but in the interest of time, I believe the committee needs to be aware of certain undisclosed connections relevant to today's topic." Chelsea blinked. The chairman hesitated. "Proceed, briefly." Zohran stood up, not in a hurry, not to make a scene, just with the calm of someone who knows he's holding something explosive and doesn't need to shout to be heard. "I'd like to submit for the record a series of encrypted messages recovered from a private server tied to the Clinton family's communications between 2018 and 2021, he said. The messages, along with recently declassified travel logs, raised serious questions about whether Chelsea Clinton exercised personal influence over federal policy decisions, while also maintaining a relationship with the former president that frankly sits outside the boundaries of professional norms. The room dropped several degrees. "What?" a reporter muttered from the gallery. Chelsea sat still, frozen for a beat, then shifted in her chair, her jaw worked slightly, the first sign of anything behind the mask. Zohran continued, holding up a copy of the message headers. "These communications suggest frequent off-the-record meetings, in some cases overlapping with budget discussions related to education, health policy, and foreign contracts. None of these meetings appear in the official White House logs, but Chelsea was present, so was her father." A ripple ran across the room. People started texting. Someone from Chelsea's team leaned forward and whispered. The chairman raised his voice. "Representative Mamdani, are you suggesting personal misconduct?" "I'm not suggesting," Zohran replied. "I'm submitting verified communications. The committee and the public can draw their own conclusions." Chelsea finally spoke. Her voice clipped. "This is a lie." "Would you like to deny it under oath?" Zohran asked, turning slightly toward her. "I said it's illusty and frankly disgusting." Chelsea's voice cracked just a little. That was the moment it shifted. Not because of what Zohran said, but because Chelsea responded the way she did. Not with facts, not with documentation, but emotion, defensiveness, publicly. The air in the room felt tighter. More cameras tilted in Zohran's direction. The chairman called for order. But it was clear the hearing wasn't going back to routine. What Zohran had just started was only the beginning, and he hadn't even opened the second folder yet. Zohran didn't rush. He sat back down and gently slid a second folder forward, its tab marked with a single black dot. He didn't even look at Chelsea. He didn't need to. The room was already watching him. The chairman tapped his gavel once. "Representative Mamdani, you may proceed, but keep your remarks on topic." "They are," Zohran said calmly. "This isn't a personal issue. It's an ethical one." Cameras zoomed in. Phones came out across the press box. Behind Chelsea, two aides exchanged frantic whispers. A third typed something into his phone and slipped out of the room. Zohran reached into the folder and pulled out a printed message, just one, and held it up. "This communication," he said, "is dated July 17th, 2019, 4 days before the administration made a quiet adjustment to the tax allocation for charter school programs in several states." The message reads, quote, "Let's have our meeting early. He doesn't want anyone else in the room. Same place. He said it's better when it's just the two of us." A few gasps echoed from the back. Zohran didn't stop. This message was sent from Chelsea Clinton's known encrypted account to a contact traced to the internal West Wing network. That location, cross-referenced with travel logs, shows she flew into Milwaukee the same morning President Clinton was holding a closed-door fundraiser. No public record of the meeting exists. No notes, no other attendees. Chelsea sat up straighter. "That message is out of context," she said. "Completely twisted. You're fabricating intent." "I'm quoting your words," Zohran said plainly. "Nothing more. And I'm not accusing, I'm asking why policy moved quietly days after these meetings." Chelsea folded her arms. These kinds of accusations are why no one serious wants to serve in public office anymore. It's disgusting. "It's not an accusation, Ms. Clinton," Zohran replied. "It's a question, and you haven't answered it." A Republican, Representative Caleb Strickland of Missouri, leaned into his mic. "Mr. Chairman, are we really entertaining tabloid-level conspiracies here?" Zohran turned slightly. "Congressman, if you'd like to call verified White House travel logs a tabloid, I'd ask you to put that on the record." Caleb muttered something under his breath, but said nothing more. Zohran went on. "There's more. March 3rd, 2020, 22 days before a federal contract worth $89 million was granted to a New York-based consulting firm that later admitted to ties with the Clinton family. Chelsea landed in Sacramento the night before. Again, no official record of a meeting, but her father made a private stopover at the same hotel. He paused. There were no security logs filed for that visit, but a hotel staffer submitted an anonymous report last year about an unnamed high-profile guest and restricted elevator access for just two individuals between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. At that, Chelsea's voice snapped. "Are you seriously insinuating that something inappropriate happened between me and my father?" Zohran tilted his head. "I'm pointing out that a series of decisions, money movements, and off-the-record meetings follow a consistent pattern. It's not personal, it's about accountability." The room hung in that moment, awkward, heavy. Then someone coughed, and Zohran reached again into his folder. "One more for now." He held up a black and white photograph. This image was taken by a staffer who thought nothing of it at the time. It shows Chelsea Clinton and Bill Clinton leaving the back entrance of a private estate in Naples, Florida. No formal reason for the visit was ever given, though 2 weeks later, funding for regional FEMA services was quietly slashed. The owner of that estate, CEO of the private company that was awarded the federal relief subcontract months later. The chairman looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. Chelsea, for the first time, looked directly at the cameras. Her voice was lower now. "I will not be dragged through the mud like this. I came here in good faith." "Then answer the questions," Zohran said. The chairman raised a hand. "Let's take a brief recess." Too late. Reporters were already standing. One shouted, "Chelsea, did you influence your father's policy decisions?" Another called out, "Representative Mamdani, Do you think Chelsea's hiding something? Zohran didn't speak. He simply gathered his folders and stood slowly, like someone who hadn't even warmed up yet. But the storm wasn't outside that room. It was coming from inside, and Zohran was just getting started. The hallway outside the hearing room wasn't quiet anymore. Reporters clustered like birds around a power line, firing off questions no one was ready to answer. Staffers scrambled to redirect them, but the damage was already in motion. Inside, the committee room emptied slowly. Zohran remained seated at his desk, flipping through notes, calm as ever. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't smirking, he just looked ready. Chelsea had retreated to a side chamber with her legal advisor and 2 aides. The door was closed, but thin walls don't do much against raised voices. Bits and pieces of frustration leaked through. She wasn't supposed to have that. And how did they even get clearance and get this under control? 10 minutes passed, then 15, when the chairman finally called the room back to order. Chelsea re-entered. Her posture was the same, but her face wasn't. Her makeup was still immaculate, but her expression had hardened. She looked like someone trying to stay steady on a crumbling ledge. She sat back down, adjusted her mic, and stared across the room at Zohran. "I'd like to respond directly to the accusations made earlier," Chelsea said. The chairman nodded once. Chelsea's voice was calm but forced. "I have never used my position to influence government decisions inappropriately. I have served my country and my family with integrity. These suggestions are not just offensive, they're beneath the dignity of this chamber." Zohran didn't flinch. Chelsea kept going. "Private meetings? Yes, I met with my father. Of course I did. I was a senior advisor. That's not a scandal. That's my job." "But the records," Zohran said gently. "You weren't on the logs because not every conversation makes it onto a public schedule." Chelsea snapped. "And that's the problem." Zohran replied, "There's no oversight when access is private and the stakes are public." Chelsea exhaled sharply. "This isn't about oversight. This is about trying to humiliate me on national television." Zohran raised an eyebrow. "If you feel humiliated, that's not something I control. I'm here asking questions, not making personal attacks." A few committee members shifted in their seats. The tension wasn't just between the 2 of them. It had spread across the entire panel. Everyone was thinking about what they had just seen, what they had just heard, whether any of this could stick. Chairman Halbridge broke the silence. "Ms. Clinton, can you confirm or deny the authenticity of the communications Representative Mamdani has submitted?" "I've never seen them before," Chelsea said, "and I won't comment on private, unverified materials." Zohran leaned forward. "So you're not denying the meetings took place?" Chelsea paused. "I'm saying context matters. My father and I work together. Any assumption beyond that is pure theater." The word landed hard. Theater. Zohran smiled faintly. "If this is theater, then the audience deserves a full performance. I'd like to request an independent review of the server data and the travel logs submitted today. That includes subpoena authority." That rattled the panel. The chairman pushed back. "That's outside today's agenda, but fully within the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee," Zohran said, not raising his voice. "And it's not just about one person. It's about a pattern. If we ignore it, we're setting a standard that private influence over public power is acceptable. Is that what this chamber wants to say?" No one answered. Chelsea shook her head. "You're exploiting headlines to boost your own profile." "Maybe," Zohran said. "Or maybe I'm doing the job I was elected to do, holding people accountable, even the ones who are used to being protected." The room buzzed again, but this time it wasn't noise, it was something else. Doubt. The kind that seeps in and makes people look at things differently. Chelsea sat back, eyes locked on Zohran, but she didn't say another word. But silence in that moment said more than a whole speech ever could. Zohran waited for the noise to die down before opening the final folder. Unlike the others, this one wasn't full of printed emails or highlighted paragraphs. It had color photographs, annotated screenshots, timestamps, and maps. Visuals that didn't require interpretation. "I'd like to submit several exhibits for the record," he said, not looking at Chelsea. "These include GPS metadata from federal flight logs, hotel staff shift records, and images pulled from surveillance systems in government-leased facilities. One photo in particular caught the room's attention. It showed Chelsea stepping out of a side entrance of the Intercontinental in Austin, Texas at 11:34 p.m., flanked by a security detail, but not her official one. Behind her was a man in a black coat, looking down at his phone. The metadata matched a secretive visit Bill Clinton made to the same hotel during a private lobbying dinner, 2 nights before a critical infrastructure bill was altered, one that ultimately benefited contractors tied to the Clinton Foundation. Zohran didn't narrate the whole thing. He let the evidence speak. "This isn't about catching someone in a lie," he said. "It's about showing that the people with the most influence in this country are the ones most shielded from scrutiny. That shield shouldn't exist, not but for elected officials, not for their family members." Chelsea shifted again in her seat, biting her lower lip, something not lost on the camera zoomed in on her face. Another image, Chelsea seated beside her father on a private jet in October 2020. No press, no itinerary. Zohran pointed to the timestamp and the filed flight path. The flight was rerouted mid-air to land in Charleston, West Virginia. That week, a federal prison contract was reassigned to a private vendor whose CEO had just made a large donation to the Clinton Foundation. Chelsea's voice cut in, sharp. "This is a smear campaign. You're connecting dots that don't belong together." Zohran didn't blink. "Then help us disconnect them." One of the aides behind Chelsea whispered something and passed her a note. She read it quickly, folded it, and slid it under her notepad. "I'm not going to dignify this circus," she said. "These aren't crimes. You're digging through personal moments and pretending they're sinister." Zohran stayed cool. "Ms. Clinton, this isn't about personal moments. This is about influence, patterns, timelines. If it walks like coordination and talks like coordination," Zohran said. The sentence hung unfinished, but the implication didn't need spelling out. Congresswoman Delia Monroe, a moderate from Oregon who hadn't spoken yet, leaned in. "Representative Mamdani, are you suggesting Chelsea Clinton acted as an unofficial policy advisor outside her formal role and without oversight?" Zohran looked up. "I'm not suggesting, I'm showing you the materials that indicate exactly that." Delia looked toward the chairman. "Then I support a formal review." That stirred the room. Up to that point, it had been Zohran alone doing the heavy lifting. Now someone else, someone in the middle, was stepping toward his side. Chelsea stared at Monroe, visibly stunned. "I'm not sure what you think you are seeing," she said, "but my role in the administration was always ethical, always structured, and always above board." "Then prove it," Monroe said, "because right now it doesn't look that way." There was a long pause. Chelsea opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked to her lawyer, who whispered something again, then tapped the table gently, some kind of signal. Chairman Halbridge cleared his throat. "The committee will recess again while we determine next steps." But no one moved. Reporters weren't leaving. The public live streams were holding record numbers. Zohran's name was trending nationwide, and screenshots of the exhibits were already flooding timelines. Zohran leaned forward once more before the feed cut to recess graphics. "There's more," he said, just loud enough for Chelsea and the microphone to pick up. "But I'll let you decide how much of it you want on the record. Because when you drop a match like that, it's not up to you whether the fire spreads." By the time the committee reconvened, the atmosphere had changed. The chairs creaked less, the murmurs had quieted. Nobody checked their phones because the real action wasn't online anymore. It was happening right in that room, and everyone knew it. Chairman Halbridge looked uncomfortable. Not guilty, just cornered, like someone who knew the rules but realized they weren't protecting him anymore. He cleared his throat. "Before we resume, I remind all participants that this is a formal proceeding. We expect decorum and relevance to the agenda." Zohran sat calmly, hands folded on the desk in front of him. Chelsea looked composed again, at least on the outside, but she didn't make eye contact. Not with Zohran, not with anyone. Representative Monroe raised her mic. "Mr. Chairman, I move to suspend the remainder of today's hearing agenda to address the materials submitted by Representative Mamdani." It was bold. Monroe wasn't known for grand gestures. Her strength had always been in quiet strategy, not confrontation. But something had changed. The chairman exhaled. "That's highly irregular." So are encrypted back-channel communications from a non-elected official guiding federal decisions, Monroe replied. A ripple of quiet agreement moved through the panel. People who had sat back earlier were starting to shift forward, not toward Zohran necessarily, but away from the fence they had been straddling. Chelsea sat forward. "I'd like to make a statement." Zohran didn't interrupt. He just leaned back and let the moment breathe. "I didn't come here expecting this circus," Chelsea said. "I came in good faith to talk about charitable work and public service. What I've received is a politically motivated hit job." Zohran raised his eyebrow. "Then let's focus on facts. You say this is political. Fine. Show me which dates are wrong, which messages are fabricated, which trips didn't happen." Chelsea stiffened. "You know I can't discuss classified travel details." "These weren't classified," Zohran replied. "They were just omitted. There's a difference." The chairman leaned into his mic, voice low. "If there's going to be an independent review, it will follow procedure." Zohran didn't argue. He nodded. "Of course, I'll prepare a formal motion." But then something unexpected happened. Representative Leo Franco, a conservative from Arizona, spoke up. "Before this gets buried in protocol, I just want to say something." He wasn't looking at Chelsea or Zohran. He was looking out toward the gallery. "Whatever side you're on, whether you think this is overreach or overdue, you have to admit we've let too much slide over the years." That caught everyone off guard, especially Chelsea. Leo continued slowly. "I'm not saying I believe everything that's been presented, but I do believe we owe the American people transparency, even if that means asking uncomfortable questions." Chelsea's face didn't move, but her foot started tapping beneath the table. Zohran nodded. "Thank you, Representative Franco." The chairman looked defeated. "Motion to suspend the agenda is under review. We'll break for 5 minutes." He banged the gavel once and stood, disappearing behind the side door before anyone could ask another question. The moment the room loosened, Zohran stood and walked toward the rear exit, not rushed, not smiling, just walking. Chelsea watched him go, her hand clenched into a fist under the desk. One of her aides reached over and whispered something in her ear. She didn't respond, her jaw locked in place. Outside the chamber, journalists were already crowding the hallway, throwing out questions like confetti. Zohran ignored them and headed straight for the stairwell, avoiding the cameras. He wasn't looking for spotlight, but the spotlight was coming anyway. Because once people start paying attention, the silence of yesterday had started to sound like complicity. By mid-afternoon, Zohran's questioning was everywhere. Clips from the hearing flooded Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, even Reddit. Some were sliced down to 40 seconds, just enough to show Zohran calmly holding up that photo of Chelsea outside the Intercontinental. Others were full 10-minute uploads, complete with commentary from legal experts, influencers, and former staffers. The hashtag Mamdani vs Chelsea was already pulling in over 5 million views, and it hadn't even been 12 hours. But what really cracked things wide open was the footage someone dug up from October 2020. A grainy late-night news clip from a local Charleston station showed Bill Clinton's motorcade arriving at the back entrance of a building no one had ever explained. The angle was poor, the lighting awful, but the timestamp matched the flight data Zohran had referenced earlier. In the clip, just barely, a blonde figure could be seen stepping out of the second SUV alone. No crowd, no reporters, just security and shadows. Online sleuths jumped on it like wolves. "Is that Chelsea? Why was she there? She had no role in this contract. Why is she getting out of a black SUV at 1:00 a.m.? Tell me again how this is normal." Every frame was analyzed, and the more people looked, the more it all seemed to line up. Zohran's folder had included hotel staff reports, GPS tags, even elevator records. Now, this blurry video, recovered from a forgotten local broadcast, felt like confirmation. Chelsea's defenders tried to push back. Her communications director issued a short statement around 4 p.m. Today's hearing was marked by political theater and misleading interpretations. Ms. Clinton has always conducted herself with integrity. But it landed flat. No denial, no explanation, just language that felt vague. Too vague for the moment. Meanwhile, Zohran hadn't spoken to the press at all. He didn't need to. His team quietly released a 12-page PDF to the committee press corps labeled "For Immediate Transparency." It included redacted versions of the flight logs and screenshots of the metadata used in his presentation. Everything time-stamped, everything sourced. More pressure followed. Journalists who had dismissed the hearing that morning that were suddenly digging into old visitor logs. Talk shows brought in ethics professors and body language experts. One said, Chelsea's reaction wasn't the response of someone angry about lies. It was someone losing control of the narrative. That stung. Back inside the Capitol, Chelsea sat in a private lounge waiting for her car. Her aides had gone silent, phones buzzing with unread texts. She stared at the carpet, barely blinking. "They weren't supposed to have that," she whispered. Her lawyer looked up. "What? The folder? The one with the photo from Austin?" "That's not public. That came from someone on the inside. You think it's someone from the old staff?" Chelsea didn't answer. She just kept staring, because that was the part no one was saying out loud. Zohran hadn't guessed at these meetings. He'd known. Every time, every location, every coded message. Zohran hadn't stumbled into this. He'd been handed breadcrumbs by someone who used to be close. Someone who didn't want to be silent anymore. Outside, the car pulled up. Chelsea stood slowly, face tight. "I'm not answering anything until we find out who leaked this." Her lawyer sighed. "The leaks aren't the problem. The optics are." She didn't respond. At the same time, Zohran's office remained quiet. No victory speech, no press parade, just an assistant walking down the hall with a fresh stack of printed emails, a new folder tucked under his arm. Because while Chelsea was focused on damage control, Zohran was already preparing for the next round. The hallway outside Chelsea's private holding room was still, but inside the atmosphere was anything but. Her lead advisor, Vincent Dre, paced in tight circles, sweating through his collar. Another aide, Carla, withdrew into a corner, furiously typing on her phone. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came right after someone got caught in a lie and didn't yet know which part of the story had collapsed. Chelsea sat on the edge of a beige leather couch, still in her heels, still in full makeup, but visibly worn down. Her fingers tapped against the side of a water bottle she wasn't drinking from. She hadn't spoken in 5 full minutes. Then suddenly, "Who gave it to him?" Vincent stopped pacing. "We don't know, but someone had access to documents we never cleared." "Not just documents," Chelsea muttered. "The photos, the timestamps, the messages. That wasn't a Freedom of Information request. That came from the inside." "Possibly," he said, "or someone flipped. Either way, we've got a problem." "No," she said quietly. "We have a traitor back on Capitol Hill." The conversation had already moved forward. Zohran Mamdani wasn't in front of the cameras. He was behind closed doors in a smaller, private committee room, with 3 of his aides and a man from the Oversight Subcommittee who'd flown in from Pennsylvania that afternoon just to meet with him. His name was Ross Banford, a quiet, methodical man known for avoiding press and digging deep where others skimmed the surface. "This is bigger than one ethics hearing," Ross said, flipping through the evidence Zohran had handed him. "I've been waiting for someone to crack this door open. I didn't expect it to be you." "I didn't expect the door to swing this fast," Zohran replied. Ross held up a flight record. "You verified this with Homeland Security?" "Twice," Zohran nodded. "The secondary confirmation came from an anonymous DHS contractor." "Everything matches." Ross nodded slowly. "And the encrypted emails?" "There are scrubbed versions of private messages pulled from a hard drive recovered in late 2022 during a separate financial fraud probe. The drive was seized from a former advisor to the Clinton Foundation. Most people thought it was junk." Ross let out a breath through his nose. "It's not junk." "No," Zohran agreed. "It's leverage." But Ross wasn't smiling. "Leverage like this gets people nervous. Not just Chelsea, not just the family. Everyone who benefited from looking the other way." Zohran leaned back. "I'm not trying to take down the whole tree. I'm shining a light on the rot." Ross looked at him. "Just be ready. People don't stay quiet when their money's threatened, especially people who've never heard no before." Meanwhile, Vincent and Carla were on the phone with a damage control strategist, an old friend of the Clinton inner circle who specialized in one thing: delay and distract. "We're preparing a press push to discredit the hearing," he said over speaker. "We can roll out statements from former administration allies, make this look like a political stunt." Chelsea stared at the window. "No one's going to believe that if we don't explain the documents." "That's not the play," the strategist replied. "The play is to cast doubt on the source. Doesn't matter if it's true. All that matters is making people second-guess what they saw." Chelsea turned to him. "What if the person who leaked this keeps going?" There was a pause. "Then you need to consider a proactive legal move," he said. "Force Zohran to release his sources. If he refuses, claim it's fabricated. If he complies, scare the next person into silence." Silence again. Back in Zohran's office, his assistant knocked once. "They're requesting an interview," he said. "Not media, legal." Zohran raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Congressional counsel. They want to know how deep this goes." Zohran stood up. "Tell them I'll talk, but not behind closed doors, because once you make something public, you protect it." And Zohran wasn't planning to bury anything. The committee room was still half empty when Representative Vincent Rainer walked in. Vincent wasn't the type people expected to speak up in moments like this. A second-term Republican from rural Idaho, he usually kept his head down and his soundbites safe. He didn't appear on primetime interviews. He didn't tweet, but he had a reputation for reading every page of every document, quietly, thoroughly, and without telling anyone he was doing it. That afternoon, though, as the hearing reconvened, Vincent surprised everyone. Chairman Halbridge was preparing to skip over the topic entirely, trying to return the hearing to the original agenda on charitable transparency and family foundations. But just as he opened his mouth, Vincent clicked his mic on. "Before we move forward," he said, voice measured, "I'd like to revisit the motion made by Representative Mamdani regarding a formal review of the submitted materials." Halbridge blinked. "That motion is still under consideration." "And I support it," Vincent said, cutting him off. "I believe we'd be making a mistake by brushing past what was shown today." Silence again. Chelsea, seated 2 chairs down, slowly turned her head toward him. She didn't look angry. She looked betrayed. "Are you serious?" she asked, not through the mic, but loud enough to be heard. Vincent turned toward her calmly. "This isn't personal, Ms. Clinton. This is process. You're legitimizing a smear campaign. I'm saying facts deserve sunlight. If there's nothing to hide, then nothing should be feared." Zohran leaned slightly toward his own mic. "Thank you, Representative Rainer." "I'm not defending your conclusions," Vincent said without looking at Zohran. "I'm defending your right to ask the question." Chairman Halbridge adjusted his tie. "I'd remind all members that this committee is not a court of law. Almost like a hall. These aren't criminal proceedings." Vincent nodded. "Understood. But we are lawmakers. If this body isn't willing to look into behavior that straddles the line between influence and impropriety, then what exactly are we doing here?" It was quiet again, that kind of quiet that creeps in when something obvious finally gets said out loud. Halbridge mumbled, "We'll take a vote later this week." But by then it would be too late. The shift had already started. The news picked up on Rainer's statement almost instantly. Headlines read, "Republican breaks rank to back inquiry into Chelsea evidence." Not that he was backing the content, but that he believed it mattered enough to investigate. And that was enough to crack open the wall. Inside the chamber, Chelsea sat still, but her gaze burned into Rainer. Her knuckles whitened around her pen. She whispered to Carla behind her, "We need to know who got to him." Zohran, meanwhile, made a note on his pad. Not a victory lap, not even a smile, just a single word, leverage. He wasn't in a rush. He knew this didn't need to be won in a single day. The facts weren't going anywhere, and the room was no longer looking at him like a disruptor. They were looking at him like someone who had receipts and the confidence to stand on them. A few seats over, Delia Monroe glanced at Zohran, then at Rainer. A small nod passed between them. Not alliance, just acknowledgement. Outside the hearing, more developments brewed on. A nonprofit government watchdog group filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all security logs and visitor records for the dates Zohran had referenced. Reporters began comparing Zohran's claims to archived footage, old financial records, tax filings, and property deeds. The pieces were starting to speak for themselves. But inside the Capitol, the biggest shift wasn't in evidence, it was in posture. Committee members who had avoided eye contact with Zohran now looked his way when he spoke. Staffers who had rolled their eyes that morning were now following him in the hallway, trying to get copies of what he hadn't yet presented. The silence around him had begun to break, because when truth starts echoing in a room, the people pretending not to hear it can't ignore it forever. By dawn the next day, the story had overtaken every major news outlet, not buried under headlines about the economy or weather. Front and center, network anchors used phrases like explosive, shocking, impossibly historic. Even channels that usually avoided political scandal couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just about one committee hearing, it was about what it revealed and who had the nerve to say it out loud. Chelsea Clinton's team scrambled to contain the fallout. They pushed out a pre-recorded interview with a friendly morning show host, hoping to redirect attention back to her foundation work. But viewers weren't buying it. Comments on the network's page flooded with questions like, "Where's the explanation for the hotel meetings? And why dodge the logs?" For every polished soundbite, there were 10 rough screenshots from the hearing, each more damning than the last. Meanwhile, Zohran Mamdani hadn't said a word publicly since the hearing ended. No tweets, no interviews. He was letting the facts speak, and that silence made him louder. It made him feel like someone with nothing to prove, someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Inside his district office in Queens, his team gathered early. Half the staff hadn't slept. Phones rang nonstop. Email inboxes were full. Messages from voters, whistleblowers, legal observers, and surprisingly, 3 former White House aides who wanted to share information confidentially. Zohran walked in holding a coffee he hadn't sipped, eyes sharp. "Let it ride," he told his staff. "We don't chase cameras, we chase truth." The line was simple, but it carried weight. Back in D.C., a few Republican committee members who'd stayed silent the day before began holding backdoor meetings, not because they suddenly wanted to hold Chelsea accountable, but because their donors were watching, and those donors didn't like uncertainty. Rayner was asked to clarify his statement in private. He didn't backtrack. He told them plainly, "She asked the right questions. If that scares people, maybe they're part of the problem." By midday, the Oversight Subcommittee issued a formal statement. A preliminary review of the evidence presented by Representative Mamdani is underway. Further details to be announced. That single sentence was enough to signal the shift. What Zohran started was no longer a headline. It was now a process. And Chelsea, she canceled 2 public appearances. A press dinner in Baltimore was scratched at the last minute. Rumors swirled about a family retreat being pulled together behind closed doors. No one could confirm where she was. Some online speculated she'd leave the country for a while. Others joked about a Chappaqua lockdown. The truth was simpler and heavier. She wasn't used to losing control. Meanwhile, Zohran received a letter, hand-delivered, not emailed, from a former communications staffer who once worked on Chelsea's policy team. The letter was brief but clear. "You're asking the right questions. There's more where that came from. I don't want immunity, I want to be heard." Zohran folded it, set it aside, and looked out the window of his office. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "I watched the hearing. I'm proud, but be careful. These people don't play fair." Zohran smiled faintly. He already knew that. But this wasn't about playing safe. It never was. The people who'd been untouchable for years were finally being touched. Not with violence or slander, but with questions. Real ones, the kind that don't just sting, they stick. He wasn't trying to ruin anyone. He was trying to remind the country that power without scrutiny becomes something dangerous, something rotten, something that hides behind prestige and money. And now the country was watching. Because once a story like this reaches living rooms, kitchens, and car rides, once it's no longer political but personal, there's no stuffing it back into silence. 3 days after the hearing, Zohran Mamdani sat on a wooden bench outside a community center in Queens. No cameras, no makeup, no prepared notes. Just him, a warm breeze, and a small group of college students who'd asked him to speak. He wasn't there to talk about Chelsea or the Clintons or committee hearings. He was there to talk about truth, about what it costs, what it asks of you, and why it matters anyway. One student, maybe 19, leaned forward and asked the question that had been on everyone's mind since the hearing. How did you know they wouldn't just shut you down? Zohran looked at him for a second, thought about the early mornings, the hours of research, the people who sent anonymous tips because they were too scared to attach their names. Thought about all the times he'd sat in a room and watched powerful people look him in the face like he didn't exist. Then he answered, I didn't. The group went quiet. I didn't know if I'd be cut off. I didn't know if the chair would shut the mic. I didn't know if they'd smear me the next day. But what I did know, he said, was that I had to say it anyway. Because if we keep letting fear write the rules, nothing ever changes. It wasn't a speech, it was just truth. Back in DC, the formal request for a subcommittee probe had been filed quietly, officially. No headline, no press release. But it was in motion, and that meant Chelsea Clinton would be asked to testify again, this time under different terms, with legal guardrails she couldn't spin away from. Her team tried to stall, claiming security risks, scheduling conflicts, even emotional distress. But it didn't matter. The machine had started turning. The headlines had cooled a little, but the questions hadn't. Late-night hosts were still talking about it. Political podcasts were dissecting Zohran's strategy. Civil rights groups praised his tenacity. Former federal attorneys began weighing in, not on the salacious parts, but on the ethical ones. The country wasn't just watching a scandal, it was watching a shift. One where family names didn't shield you, where proximity to power didn't excuse you, where a progressive legislator from Queens could walk into a room, pull out a folder, and make the entire system blink. Zohran didn't see himself as a hero. He wasn't trying to be one. He was just tired. Tired of watching people with money and fame dodge the rules everyone else had to follow. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Chelsea. It was about truth, about what happens when people stop whispering and start speaking. And in the end, it wasn't the documents or the photos that cracked the image. It was the reaction, the silence, the defensiveness, the absence of a clear denial. Because the truth has a strange way of showing up, not all at once, but in pieces. And when someone's trying to hide something, even their pauses feel loud. The final lesson is this: power is only dangerous when no one asks where it's been. So ask, even when you're scared, even when they tell you it's the wrong time, even when they say you don't belong in the room, ask anyway. Because you never know how far one good question can echo. If this story made you think, even just a little, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter, and you deserve to hear them told honestly.